My husband found out on our wedding day that my mother once tried to adopt him. Not years ago, as a passing thought. Not casually. She went through the process. She visited him. She almost took him home. And I knew. I knew for 3 months before the wedding. I just didn't tell him. Mark and I had been together for 4 years, and until this happened, I would have described our relationship as steady in a way that felt rare. There were no dramatic breakups, no toxic cycles, no threats to leave. We built things slowly. We chose each other every day. He doesn't talk much about his early childhood, but I knew he had lived in a children's home until he was 6, before being adopted by a family who, by all accounts, treated him well. Still, there were gaps in him. Places he didn't like to look at. And when he proposed, when he said, "I want you to be my family," I understood how much that cost him. 2 weeks after the engagement, I found a photo in my mother's apartment. A small boy with blonde hair, serious eyes. On the back, adoption candidate. 2002. Mark's name. Underneath it, an adoption application. Signed by my mother. She didn't deny it. I was ready to be his mother, she said. She told me she had visited him several times. That he held her hand. That he cried when she left. The agency eventually rejected her application. Too emotionally attached, they said. She told me it didn't matter anymore. It had never happened. But it had. It had happened enough for him to remember. Because later that week, without knowing any of this, Mark mentioned a woman from the children's home who used to visit often. She smelled like cinnamon, he said. Then one day she stopped coming. I thought maybe I did something wrong. My mother has always smelled like cinnamon. That's when I realized this wasn't an abstract piece of history. It was a wound. And it had my mother's fingerprints on it. I could have told him then. I didn't. Because I was afraid. Not of his anger. But of something worse. That he might look at her and feel chosen. And if he felt chosen by her, what would that make me? For a few days after I found the documents, I convinced myself it was old history. Something painful, yes, but finished. Then the details started to surface. Not because my mom confessed, because she slipped. We were having dinner at her place when Mark mentioned the name of the elementary school he attended after being adopted. She nodded immediately. That's a strong school district, she said. Mark looked mildly surprised. You know it. She smiled. I read about it once. It was subtle. Too subtle. But it stayed with me. Because she didn't ask which city. She didn't hesitate. She already knew. That night, I went through her old files again. This time I wasn't looking for proof that she tried to adopt him. I was looking for proof that she stopped caring. I didn't find it. What I found instead was a folder labeled Community Outreach. Inside were donation receipts. Different years. Different programs. One of them was a scholarship fund tied to the university Mark attended. Dated the year he almost dropped out. I knew that story. He told me once he nearly lost his apartment during his second year because he couldn't afford rent. His adoptive parents eventually helped, but there had been a gap. A dangerous gap. The receipt had a note attached. Anonymous housing assistance. I stared at the university name for a long time. Then I checked the date. It matched the exact semester he had struggled. When I confronted her, she didn't panic. She didn't deny it. I donate to education programs, she said calmly. For him. For students. You knew he was there. She held my gaze. Yes. She said she had asked around, through old contacts from the children's home. Not constantly. Not obsessively. Just occasionally. Milestones. Graduation. College acceptance. Career changes. Just to make sure he was okay, she said. Just to make sure. As if she were entitled to that reassurance. I asked her the question I had been afraid to say out loud. Did you know we were going to meet? She didn't answer right away. She washed a glass that was already clean. Dried it carefully. I knew he would be at that fundraiser, she said. My chest tightened. You told me to go, I whispered. Yes. Not dramatic. Not defensive. Just factual. She hadn't forced anything. She hadn't orchestrated our conversation. She had simply placed us in the same room. Then stepped back. Let it unfold. I wanted to see who he had become, she said. Not whether I'd be happy. Not whether we'd be compatible. She wanted to see him. I started replaying everything in my head. The way she welcomed him instantly. The way she remembered details about his career. The way she seemed unsurprised by his interests. It wasn't intuition. It was information. Collected quietly over years through other people. One evening, Mark told me something that made my stomach turn. I always wondered why that woman stopped visiting, he said, referring to the cinnamon memory. I thought maybe she realized I wasn't what she wanted. He laughed lightly. But there was something raw underneath. I think if I ever saw her again, I'd just want to ask why. He didn't know she had seen him again. Not in person but through updates. Through contacts. Through carefully maintained distance. She knew he graduated. She knew when he moved cities. She knew when he switched jobs. She knew when he started therapy. That one shook me. He mentioned therapy casually. Some mentor from an alumni program suggested it, he said. Said she'd noticed I take on too much pressure. An alumni program. I didn't even need to ask. When I confronted my mom about that, she didn't deny it. I never contacted him directly, she said. I just nudged things when I could. As if his life were something she could gently steer. That's when it hit me. She hadn't tried to replace his adoptive parents. She hadn't tried to reclaim him publicly. She had built something quieter. A shadow presence, invisible help, anonymous support, and proximity. And when I brought him home for the first time, smiling and nervous, she didn't react like someone meeting her daughter's boyfriend. She reacted like someone whose long wait had finally ended. The worst part wasn't what she had done. It was how convinced she was that she had done nothing wrong. I never crossed a line, she told me. But she had. The line just didn't have a name. A week before the wedding, I asked her one final question. If he finds out everything, what will you tell him? The truth, she said. That you followed his life? Yes. That you helped him financially? If he asks. And if he feels something for you? She looked at me carefully. He deserves to know someone always chose him. That was the moment I understood something I didn't want to admit. This wasn't about protection. This was about claiming. That night, lying next to Mark, I felt something ugly inside me. It wasn't fear, it wasn't just anger, it was jealousy. Because she had chosen him first. Because she had wanted him before I ever knew his name. Because she had invested years into his survival. And all I had was 4 years of love. And suddenly, that felt fragile. The morning of the wedding, I told myself I would confess before the ceremony. But I didn't. I told myself I would say it after the vows, before the reception. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled for photos and held his hand. Promised forever. And let the truth sit between us like a live wire. Then my mother stood up to give her toast. And I knew it was too late. The reception hall was loud. Glasses clinking, music swelling, and people laughing too hard. Everything felt bright and polished and permanent. My mother stood when it was time for her toast. She held the microphone with both hands. She looked calm. I've had a long time to think about what family means, she began, smiling at us. And sometimes, the most important bonds don't begin the day you meet. A few guests nodded politely. I felt my spine go rigid. She turned to Mark. From the first time I saw you, she said softly, I knew you were meant to be part of my life. There was that shift subtle. That was wrong. Mark's smile flickered, just slightly. She continued. Some connections feel familiar before you understand why. And sometimes, even when life takes a different path than you hoped, the right people still find their way back. The room was quiet now. I could feel his hand in mine, warm and steady, but no longer relaxed. My mother looked at him the way she had always looked at him, not as a mother-in-law, as something unfinished. I am so proud of the man you've become, she said. I've always been. He turned his head slowly toward me. Not confused, not angry, just searching. When the toast ended, people clapped. Music started again, but he didn't move. He kept looking at me. What did she mean? He asked quietly. My mouth went dry. She's just emotional, I said too quickly. He didn't break eye contact. Don't do that, he said. Don't simplify it. That's when I felt it. That thin crack opening. We stepped outside, away from the noise, into the cool night air behind the venue. The music was muffled now. He was distant. He faced me fully. Did she know me before you? He asked. It wasn't a wild guess. It was instinct. And I hesitated. Just for a second. But it was long enough. His face changed. Not dramatically. Just understanding. You knew, he said. I swallowed. Yes. The word felt heavier than the ring on my hand. He didn't yell, he didn't step away. He just stood there very still. How? He asked. She tried to adopt you, I said. The sentence hung between us. His expression didn't explode. It folded inward. When? He asked. Before you were placed with your parents. And you found this out when? 3 months ago. 3 months. Engagement photos, guest lists, and vows written. 3 months. He looked down at his hands. Then back at me. And you let me sit next to her, he said quietly. At dinners. At holidays. You let me talk about that woman from the children's home, knowing. Each word landed without force, but they landed. I didn't know how to tell you, I whispered. That's not what I asked. His voice didn't rise, it thinned. Did you think I deserved to know? Yes. Then why didn't you? Because I was afraid you'd feel something for her. Because I didn't want to compete with a history that started before me. Because I was jealous of a 6-year-old version of you. I didn't say any of that. I thought it would complicate things, I said instead. He let out a slow breath. Complicate things, he repeated. He leaned back against the wall, staring somewhere past me. Was I your husband? He asked softly. Or was I the unfinished story between you two? My chest tightened. That's not fair. No, he said. And he looked at me just then. And there was something in his eyes I had never seen before. There was no anger, not betrayal, just distance. You let me build something with her, he continued. You watched me open up. You watched me trust her. His jaw tightened slightly. You made me sit across from a woman who could have been my mother. And you let me wonder, out loud, why she left. The air felt thin. I was protecting you, I said.
He shook his head.
No, you were protecting yourself. That one landed. Because it was true. He closed his eyes for a moment. I always thought I imagined that connection, he said quietly. That feeling that she recognized me somehow. I didn't move. I thought maybe I just wanted it, he continued. Maybe I needed someone older to look at me like I mattered. He opened his eyes. And you knew that. It wasn't a question. I reached for him. He didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in either. Do you understand what this does to someone like me? He asked. Not angry, just tired. I spent my whole childhood wondering why people left, he said. Now I find out one of them didn't. She just watched. The word echoed. And you, he said, barely above a whisper. You watched too. That was the ruin. Not shouted, not dramatic, just stated. I had watched. Watched him talk about his past. Watched him trust her. Watched him sit at the same table as the woman who once promised not to let him disappear. And I said nothing. Inside, the music swelled. People were calling our names. Looking for us. Our wedding was still happening. But something had shifted. Something irreversible. He looked at me one more time. I don't know who I am to her, he said. And right now, I don't know who I am to you. Then he stepped past me, back, toward the lights. And for the first time in 4 years, I wasn't sure if we were walking back into a celebration, or out of something that had already ended. He didn't come back to the dance floor. He didn't make a scene. He didn't humiliate anyone. He finished the reception like a polite stranger. He smiled for photos. He thanked guests. He held my hand when people looked at us. But it wasn't the same hand. It felt formal, careful. Like something fragile he wasn't sure he wanted to keep holding. We didn't talk in the car. The drive home was quiet except for the sound of the tires against the road. When we got inside the apartment, he finally took off his jacket and loosened his tie like he had just come back from a business meeting. Not his wedding. He sat down on the edge of the couch. I stayed standing. I need to ask you something, he said calmly. If I had told you there was a woman from my childhood who used to visit, who made me feel safe, who disappeared without explanation, and you knew where she was, would you have told me? The answer was obvious. Yes, I said. He looked at me. No, you wouldn't have. The honesty in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't care that she tried to adopt me, he said. I don't even care that she kept track of my life. He paused. I care that you decided I couldn't handle the truth. I opened my mouth and closed it because he was right. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me choosing control over trust. I was afraid, I admitted. Of what? That you'd feel something, I said quietly. For her. He studied my face for a long time. And if I did, he asked. That question hit harder than everything else. Because I didn't have an answer that didn't make me sound selfish. I didn't want to share you, I whispered. There it was. Ugly, small, and honest. He leaned back slowly. I wasn't something to share, he said. I felt that in my chest. I was a person trying to understand my own history. Silence stretched between us. Then he said something that I know I will hear for the rest of my life. You turned my childhood into a secret you managed. Not shouted, not dramatic, just true. He stood up and walked to the window. I spent years thinking that woman left because I wasn't enough, he said. Now I find out she didn't leave. She just stayed in the background. He looked over his shoulder. And the one person I chose to build a future with knew the whole time. I started crying then. Not loud, just quietly. Because there was no defense left. What happens now? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, I need space. Not from the truth. From the silence. That was the line. Not divorce, not goodbye, just space. But the kind that changes things. The next morning he called my mother. Not to yell, not to accuse, just to ask questions. I listened from the bedroom. I couldn't hear her words. Only his. So you watched. You paid for my housing. You thought that was love. Then, I don't need you to be my mother. And finally, I needed you to be honest. He hung up and he didn't cry. That scared me more than anything. Before he left to stay with a friend for a while, he stood in the doorway with his suitcase. I love you, he said. And that almost broke me more than anger would have. But love isn't ownership. I nodded because I finally understood. I had been fighting my mother for a role, for a position, for a title. And in doing that, I forgot something simple. He wasn't a prize. He wasn't an unfinished adoption. He wasn't a story that belonged to either of us. He was a person. And we both tried to claim him in different ways. It's been 3 weeks. We're in therapy together. He hasn't taken off his ring. Neither have I. But he doesn't call my mother anymore. And I don't know if he ever will. The last thing he said about her was this. I deserve the choice. That's what this was about.
Choice.
She chose him without asking. I chose silence without asking. And now he's choosing for himself. I don't know how this ends. But I know this much. Love isn't proving you were there first. It isn't investing years in secret. It isn't protecting someone from a truth because you're afraid of losing your place. Love is giving someone the full picture and trusting they'll still choose you. This time, I didn't. And now I have to wait and see if he does.